Let's now examine another interesting problem, the behavior of the dust on the moon. On Earth, the dust remains attached to objects thanks to the humidity of the air. On the moon, however, there is no atmosphere, and therefore there is no humidity. Theoretically, lunar dust should not be able to stick to any particular surface. Looking at the images from the Apollo missions, though, we have dozens of situations in which the lunar dust sticks everywhere. That happens mostly on the astronauts' suits, with dust sticking not only to the lower part of their legs, but also to the arms, trunk, and even the backpacks. Often it's the astronauts themselves who notice the amount of dust that sticks to them.
I am covered from head to foot with dust. Yeah, we got some work to do here, boy. They're all dirty. You ought to see you back. I couldn't have gotten any dirtier than you.
From Houston Center, someone has noticed the problem as well.
Looks like you guys have been playing in a coal bin.
Dust inexplicably sticks to the surface of the cameras and their lenses too. The astronauts often complain about this.
We gotta check the dust on the lens on these cameras.
Sometimes the problem is so serious that they can't even read the settings.
So much dust on the camera, it's hard to read the settings.
Same problem for the television cameras used by the astronauts. In this case, we notice several speckles of dust that are stuck to the camera lens. Here instead, the entire lens is covered by dust. The lighter spots are the only areas of the lens not covered by dust. Sometimes the astronauts realize this by themselves.
I think we need to dust the TV lens. It's pretty dusty.
In other cases, the request to clean the lens comes directly from the control center.
Before we leave this area, we want you to brush the LCRU and the TV camera lens.
These images shot on Earth show dust particles that stick to the lens because of humidity. Why does the same happen on the lens used by the astronauts, given that there is no humidity on the moon? Also, the gnomon, this color chart used by the astronauts, simply refuses to stay clean.
Radar gnomon's pretty dirty, unfortunately, Joe. Just no way to keep that color chart clean with all this dust. Roger.
It's not just the astronauts' suits and instruments that get covered with dust. For example, look at the lunar rover with the frame and the engine protections fully covered with dust. Or the fenders from the rover, with dust sticking on the inside of the wheels and on the outside as well. Some debunkers have suggested that all this dust may stick to objects because of some kind of electrostatic effect. But this explanation is not plausible for at least two reasons. First of all, we're talking about completely different materials from one another. The astronauts' suits, the photo cameras, the surface of the lunar rover, the lenses from the TV cameras. Secondly, NASA itself excludes this possibility when they explain that an electrostatic effect can possibly take place in the shadow areas of the moon. But in the areas hit by sunlight, this effect is instantly dissipated by the solar wind. From this NASA document, which studies the electrostatic charges on the surface of the moon, we can read, "In the photoelectron-dominated daylight plasma region, the charge dissipates almost instantly in all cases. Thus, charging on the lunar day side is not an issue." Furthermore, in some cases, more than dust, we seem to be looking at actual mud. Look, for example, at this wheel from the lunar rover. Or this other image from the wheel of the rover, with the rim that seems completely covered in mud. It's as if we were looking at a muddy wheel from an all-terrain vehicle down on Earth. There's also another, even more puzzling example. This is a thermal degradation experiment conducted during the Apollo 14 mission. How could the sand have compacted itself enough to appear like mud in a moistureless environment? There is also another detail worth mentioning. These metal plates have a series of letters and numbers engraved on their surface. Subsequently, these letters and numbers have filled up with sand. But how can the sand preserve the shape of the number once dislodged from the original place where it was formed? Here, for example, we can see the number 5, which has kept its shape even after being dislodged from the engraving. And here is the number 3, also keeping its shape after it was dislodged. How can the sand keep the original shape after having been dislodged from the engraving if we are truly in a moistureless environment? Possibly the biggest problem of all is the one posed by the footprints that the astronauts allegedly left on the surface of the moon. Wherever they go, the astronauts leave very sharp footprints on the ground. But how is it possible for lunar dust to remain so hardly compacted, to the point of maintaining the shape of the boot, being that there is no atmosphere on the moon and therefore there is no humidity? We know that in order to give sand a specific shape, it is necessary to wet it first. If the sand is dry, the sand grains won't stick to each other and the shape will not be preserved. The debunkers, however, maintain that lunar dust, which is called regolith, is much sharper than the sand on Earth. For this reason, they argue, the simple pressure from the boot is enough to compact it, even in total absence of moisture. In order to prove their theory, the Mythbusters have asked NASA for an exact replica of the moon boot and for a certain amount of a special dust prepared by NASA, which has very similar characteristics to lunar dust.
So for this test, NASA has given us a lunar regolith simulant.
It's manufactured to test equipment that is going to the moon. It's very similar to lunar dust in the fact that each particle is very sharp. Dirt on Earth has been weathered, so it's very smooth. So this is as close to lunar dust as we can get.
It's one kind of dust that Paolo Attivissimo is also very familiar with.
Questo è un campione, è un simulante, si chiama, un simulante di regolite, che è la polvere di luna sintetica che si usa per collaudare i veicoli che poi torneranno sulla Luna.
The Mythbusters have conducted their experiment in a vacuum chamber, in the total absence of moisture, thus replicating the same conditions found on the moon.
The rig is ready to take its one-legged step, and the vacuum chamber has been vacuumed.
Boot stop, vacuum. Here we go. In 3, 2.
We notice that the Mythbusters have even added some counterweights to their device in order to simulate the exact weight of the astronaut's foot on the lunar soil.
1.
Yeah! Take that!
Yeah! Look at that. We made a footprint inside of a vacuum.
And there was no water vapor, which is what this conspiracy theory is all about.
In your face, conspiracy theorists!
The Mythbusters seem very eager to celebrate, but in reality they have not succeeded at all in replicating the original footprints by the astronauts. Just look at how solid and squared the little bars of sand that have formed under the astronauts' boot are. They are almost perfect geometric solids, with sharp edges and well-defined contours. These sandbars are so solid and compacted that they even retain their shape after they are broken in pieces. It's as if we were looking at a clay model that has later dried up in the sun. It is clear that we are looking at a very different result from the one obtained by the Mythbusters in the vacuum chamber. If we were to break apart or even just try to move one of these sandbars, they would certainly not remain compacted, nor would they retain their shape. In conclusion, the Mythbusters, with their experiment, have proven the exact opposite of what they intended to prove. In absence of humidity, it's absolutely impossible to replicate the astronauts' footprints. Question: given that there is no moisture on the moon and that the solar wind dissipates electrostatic charges almost instantly, can you explain why the lunar dust sticks to all kinds of materials, from the astronaut suits to the photo cameras, from the rover's surfaces to the TV camera lenses? Can you explain how the rover's wheels can gather so much thick dirt on them as to look like they're covered in mud? Can you explain how the lunar dust can stick together to such an extent, even preserving the shape of the numbers after they were moved from the engravings in which they had formed? Given that the Mythbusters have replicated the lunar conditions under vacuum and with the sand simulant, can you explain why they were unable to reproduce the astronauts' footprints from the original photos?